And am I live? Am I not? Okay, I'm live now. Hi everyone. I forgot to do last week because I forgot last Wednesday was a Wednesday. That's the quarantine calendar for you. So for this week, I'm a bit burned out on Hegel. So depending on how I'm feeling, I may get back to in a bit. But I'd like to start with some passages from the Theory of Islamic Art, Aesthetic Concept, the Epistemic Structure by Dr. Idham Mohammed Hanash. I picked this up a little while ago and I've been meaning to get to it. So I thought I would start with some passages from here. Unity of identity and diversity of stylistic distinctives. The stylistic unity and aesthetic distinctiveness of Islamic art may well point to unified cultural and civilizational identity. Style is viewed as the artwork's inward or subjective aspect, and identity as the outward or objective form that sets it apart from other entities. Art is art not by virtue of its raw materials, which are, for the most part, a result of geographical happenstance, but rather by virtue of the style of its expression, its aesthetic content, and its matter of suggesting ideas. As for Islamic art, it is an aesthetic expression of Islam within the Arab experience. The data that make up this Arab experience have given Muslims artistic output an identifiable cultural and civilizational stamp, which can be seen, for example, in the uniform architectural styles found all throughout the Islamic world, whose civilization is colored at once by Arabism and Islam. The most significant features of Islamic art are its universality and the unity that has come from an Arabism, an Arab identity, and Islam. Arab identity, embodied in the Arabic language and Arabic calligraphy, become the primary theme of Islamic ornamentation due to the beauty with which the Arabic script conveys the visible words of God. This is why European researchers came to refer to Islamic ornamentation as Arabesque. Given the centrality of Islamic ritual prayer, Salah, the mosque came to be viewed as a symbol of Islam, the religion of divine unity and oneness, which in turn brought about a uniformity of layout and design among Muslim mosques worldwide. Given the harmony and inseparability of the factors that make up an Arab Islamic civilization, from the Arabic language to the spiritual cohesion founded on the monotheistic character of Islam, some researchers in this field have referred to Islamic art as Arabo-Islamic art, despite not having associated itself with the arts in the way that Christianity and Buddhism have. For example, Islam has nevertheless given rise to an attitude and a way of life that have exerted a profound influence on its architecture, its representational art, its style of ornamentation, and the choice of materials used in the various Islamic regions. Despite the apparently homogeneous stamp of Islamic art, one cannot help but marvel at the tremendous diversity that exists from one region to another and from one time period to another within the same region. The unity and diversity of Islamic art and Islamic reading. Some of the perspectives and interpretations offered in response to Orientalists' theories on Islamic art have been based more on emotional reactivity than on creative critiques that shed new light on the unity and diversity of Islamic art from a distinctly Islamic point of view. Hence, I will attempt in what follows to ground this theme in the basic Islamic origins and sources of what we call the term Islamic aesthetics. The origins and sources of Islamic aesthetic knowledge are the Quran, the prophetic Sunnah, the Islamic sciences of relevance to philosophy, language, rhetoric, mathematics, geometry, and optics, as well as the method we might term Islamic art criticism, which entails an objective reading of the unity and diversity of Islamic art. The Islamic theory of unity and diversity. We can discern the epistemological, that's such a hard word to read aloud for me, epistemological origin and essence of this theory in the Islamic affirmation that there is no God but God, and Islam's acknowledgement of the intimate link between the divine unity and the diversity manifest in the creation. The divine unity is expressed in the words, He is God, the Creator, the Maker who shapes all forms and appearances. His alone are the attributes of perfection. All that is in the heavens and on earth extols His limitless glory, for He alone is the Almighty, truly wise. Surah Al-Hashr, I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. And know then that God is sublimely exalted, the ultimate sovereign and the ultimate truth. There is no deity save Him, the sustainer and bountiful almightiness enthroned. Surah Al-Manumin, definitely not pronouncing that one correct. My Arabic is still getting there. As for the diversity of creation just spoken in the Surah Al-Baraq, where we read, Verily in the creation of the heavens and of the earth, in the succession of night and day, and in the ships that speed through the sea with what is useful to man, and in the waters with which God sends down from the sky, giving life thereby to the earth after it has been lifeless, and causing all manner of living creatures to multiply thereon. And in the change of the winds and the clouds that run their appointed courses between the sky and earth. In all this there are messages indeed for the people who use their reason. The discourse found in the Quran and the prophetic Sunnah reveals in the vastness of the cosmos and in the innate human longing to worship, to know, to create, to build civilizations, to communicate, to form community, and to engage in useful production on behalf of the self and others. This discourse is addressed generally to humans and invisible beings, the jinn, but primarily to human beings as creatures, specially honored by God Almighty with the role of stewards on earth. The epistemological, yeah, epistemological and I can pronounce that, methodological. I actually knew that word properly. Thank you very much. Perspective reflected in Islamic discourses informed by a series of dualities which emerge from the most fundamental intimate link between God, the One, and God's various manifestations in the universe at large and in people's inner beings. The classic Quranic statements of the divine unity is found in Surah Al-Ikhlas, which reads, Say, He is the one God, God the eternal, the uncaused of all being. He begets not, and neither is He begotten, and there is nothing that could be compared with Him. As for the diversity that has been produced out of this unity, spoken of in the Surah Al-Falat, in time we shall make them fully understand our messages through what they perceive in utmost horizons of the universe and within themselves, that it will become clear unto them that this revelation is indeed the truth. Still, it is not enough for them to know that thy sustainer is witness to everything. The cosmic dialectic of unity and diversity is perceived by human beings through worship. God declares, and tell them that I have not created the invisible beings and men to any other end that they may know and worship me. Where the act of worship is understood to include the act of knowing God and God's oneness. Lastly, there are the countless subsidiary dualities which grow out of the fundamental duality of unity and diversity, the seen and the unseen, the hidden and the manifest, majesty and beauty, the giving and receiving of inspiration, creating and imitation, nature and manufacture. One Muslim thinker observed, perfection inheres in unity, and everything possesses a perfection suited to it. Hence, unity is seen as the origin of everything in existence, while the variety that emanates from this oneness can be perceived in all realms, in the beautiful names of God as they point to His sublime attributes, in material reality, and in the mysteries of the soul observed through human civilization and growing knowledge and awareness. Given the unbreakable bond that exists between unity and diversity, this duality has come to be seen as the essential core of human knowledge in general, and of Islamic knowledge in particular. In this connection, Abu Hayyan al-Tawadi stated, The true Creator, the one and only, is the source and wellspring of all things. It is from Him that abundance flows forth, and in Him that it dwindles and diminishes. The preposition from is employed here does not indicate separation, nor does the preposition in denote connection or union. Rather, I am speaking on the level of reason, which makes judgments concerning this or that entity, without affirming that such an entity enjoys some independent or separate existence. For the forms and boundaries relating to words and things are negated in the realm of divine. Instead, they become reflections of spiritual entities in motion. The sphere of the divine, words draw us nearer to the truth by ushering us into a realm beyond ourselves. The better and more complete the reflections and the clearer the words, the subtler the movement and the more refined the perception. Consequently, all evidence in words should be deemed essentially equal when seen in the light of divine oneness. This fact is illustrated perfectly in forms, lines, images, and inscriptions, all of which are infused with, surrounded by, and encompassed within unity. It is through unity that these things are fashioned and completed, and through multiplicity that they differ in one another in form and quality. Al-Tawadi concludes his exposition of the Islamic epistemological perspective on unity and diversity with the words, I seek God's protection from every craft that does not point to the one divine or invites us to worship him, acknowledge his unicity and divine rights over us, as seek his protection, endure his decrees with patience, and submit to his commands. And to continue in this oneness, I'm going to move to a further section, the oneness of God and feature-based unity. Proper critique of the theory of Islamic art requires a thorough familiarity with the Islamic doctrine of Tawhid, or the oneness of God, not simply as one distinguishing feature of this art, but of its epistemological foundation. The doctrine of Tawhid has given rise to a set of core concepts of relevance to art within three primary contexts. One, the Islamic religious context founded upon the knowledge and worship of God as one. Two, the mystical philosophical context, which highlights the synthesis of oneness and manyness. And three, the aesthetical critical context involving the study of Islamic art in light of the principle of unity and diversity. As the origin and essence of Islamic knowledge and its unifying spirit, the doctrine of Tawhid provides an overarching framework within which to understand how unity and diversity manifest themselves in the cosmos on all levels. The Islamic view of existence informs the way Muslims perceive the link between unity on the one hand and the various forms and levels at which this unity expresses itself on the other. This relationship may appear to be founded on transcendence, immanence, dialectic, so central to monotheism. The objective abstract features of the geometric pattern so prevalent in Islamic art manifest the divine unity by exemplifying the way in which finite yet repeated shapes and patterns open onto infinity, which can only be one in nature, thereby symbolizing absolute truth. The philosophy of Tawhid places the divine unity at the center of the circle of existence, which includes everything without exception, be it a work of art or anything else. The divine unity is reflected in all things existent as a multifaceted mirror. The symbolic theory of Islamic art views divine unity as a possessing an inward dimension relating to the divine majesty and its sublime perfection, which is the origin of Islamic art, and an outward dimension relating to the divine beauty, gives us the various perceptual forms of Islamic art that serve as relative manifestations of the divine majesty. Islamic art is set apart from other art forms by a set of interrelated, complementary principles, conditions, and features, including oh, that's a new Arabic word for me. Al-tansih. Moving on. That is, by the exclusion of anthropomorphic elements from the conception of the deity. Two, because Islamic art refrains from ascribing human qualities to God, be they physical or spiritual, as it tends towards al-taqlid, that is, abstraction in intellectual content, style, and form. Three, Islamic art allows one to experience the divine as a symbolic presence, hudur ramzi, manifested in a multiplicity of creative forms and images, or those, in the words of the Quran, signs, hayat. Four, wisdom is manifested in Islamic art in the orderly arrangement, sizes, and proportions of its geometrical figures. 5. Beneficence and charity are visible in Islamic art through the mastery with which its works are executed. 6. Lastly, Islamic art is marked by objectivity rather than selfishness, subjectivity, and personalism. This may be observed in the fact that, in humility before the one and only Creator, Muslim artists frequently absent themselves from their works by refraining from signing them or leaving any other traces of their personal identities. And this is another interesting portion I found over here. On the concept and epistemic theory of Islamic art, al-Fakhuki approaches the definition of Islamic art via two principal disciplines. One, science of maqsid, that is, the regular study of higher intents and purposes of Islamic law, and two, the science of jamal, or aesthetics. Jamal means beautiful. So jamal is a form too, or aesthetics. I just made another Arabic language, yay! Al-Khouki discusses certain scholars' juristic adaptations of maqsid based on the notion that art is a form of worldly enjoyment and a means of adornment. He then takes us beyond this conception of art to that of a craft whose productions inspire aesthetic reflection, provide psychological enjoyment, and support society's basic structure and way of thinking by serving as a reminder of its founding principles. In this way, Al-Khouki transcends the religious realm in general and the juristic realm in particular, in the context of which art is only discussed in terms of whether it is permissible or impermissible, without an attempt to discern art's role as a conduit of knowledge and beauty, and, as a consequence, people's need for it and its social function. Art functions within a space that is shared in common by aesthetics and religion, each of which occupies an essential place in the realm of human knowledge. Al-Fakhuki defines Islamic art as a structural entity that is consistent with the aesthetic principles of Islamic thought. Foremost among these aesthetic principles is that of al-Khalid, which he views as the starting point and the origin of beauty. As such, Khalid lies at the center of the theory of Islamic art, being the common denominator that unites all artists everywhere, whose point of reference is that of the universal Islamic vision of the world. A broad and expansive concept, the doctrine of Tawhid encompasses all levels of existence, from the divine transcendent to the concrete details given in a work of art. Al-Fakhuki integrates these graded levels of existence into what he terms transcendence and beauty. In Al-Fakhuki's understanding, the universe in which we live is the epistemic realm of what he terms as the aesthetic experience, which he defines as the realization via the data of reason of the existence of a primary metaphysical essence that transcends everything in nature and which functions as the normative principle that determines what any given entity is. The closer a visible entity is to this essence, the more beautiful it will be. This aesthetic experience is what causes art to be a process of exploring the metaphysical essence within nature. Art is a process of reading nature in search of the supernatural essence and giving this essence a visible form appropriate to it. Art is by necessity an intuitive sense of nature in search of something that is not a part of nature, in search, that is, of the transcendent. This transcendent is exalted into being who cannot be perceived by sight or sense. No human vision can encompass him, whereas he encompasses all human vision. Surah al-Ham. And there is nothing like unto him. Surah al-Shura. This ultimate cannot be described adequately by any verbal description, nor can it be represented by any image from the world of human beings or any other realm of nature. This notion of the divine's absolute unicity and sublime nature is what is known as Khalid. No, I think it's actually kind of funny that I have more trouble reading Romanized Arabic names than I do the Arabic names and Arabic script. That's why I'm having so much trouble pronouncing certain terms, because he uses the Romanized version in this text. So my pronunciation may be a bit off for different things. A critical examination of the foregoing suggests that tawhid is one, a principle underlying the Islamic concept of art as opposed to the Western concept, which views art as a kind of naive photographic simulation of nature, or rather an attempt to represent a preconceived idea in a sensory form, and partial, momentary expressions of ideas of nature and human beings as nature's highest, most complex manifestations. Hence, this Western theory of art views human beings as the measure of all things. That's a really interesting callback to way back when I first started this series, and I was reading Confessions by St. Augustine. If you all remember, he actually does voice that sentiment that a human being is the most elevated point of creation of God in such a way that it is the measure of construction through for everything else on this earth. It's interesting. 2. A distinguishing feature of Islamic aesthetics and Islamic art as the art of the infinite. The endlessly repeating patterns employed in Islamic art generate a sense of sublimity, of that which transcends place and time, yet without claiming that the patterns themselves embody what transcends them. By reflecting on these infinitely repeated patterns, the viewer's thoughts are drawn toward God, a pattern that has no beginning or end, whether perceived or imagined, creates creates an impression of infinity, and is therefore the best way to give artistic expression to the principle of tawhid. This is the primary message and mission of Islamic art, to be a constant reminder of the unicity of God Almighty. That's a very interesting thing from obviously a Westerner's perspective when we also consider the simultaneous jurist and Quranic rulings on the that you can't anthropomorphize or depict God in that sense, which is obviously very counter to Christianity. That one of the potential underlying philosophical implications is that to depict the deity, Allah, God, in that sense, an anthropomorphic sense, is to actually imply a limited nature, this lack of infinite and self, maybe not perpetuating, but continuous existence. Because obviously, if we were to anything that can be anthropomorphized, or even anthropomorphic traits in themselves, because they delineate a connection to humanity in that sense, we're mortal, we die, we are not continuous, we are not infinite. So to anthropomorphize is to give that sense of discontinuity, which is very counter to the Islamic construction of the deity of Allah. 3. The unassailable truth revealed in the unified aim and purpose of all Islamic art, and this despite the tremendous variety evident in its subject matter materials and artistic styles by virtue of differing geography and historical period. Time and place were, in fact, the two variables that left the greatest impact on Orientalists' suppositions regarding the degree to which Islamic art was authentic or borrowed from the Senecid, Byzantine, Jewish, and Christian sources. On the nature of Islamic art and its epistemological foundations. I'm getting better at that word, I think. Now, Philbook stressed the distinction between the terms reality, haqiqa, and nature, taqwa, with respect to what makes Islamic art Islamic. In the context, he contrasted, in this context, he contrasted Islamic art with both the religious arts, such as Jewish and Christian art, and the symbolic art, such as Byzantine and Hindu art. These religious arts concern themselves with God, the creator of all, of whom all people have some innate conception. This conception is free of all anthropomorphisms and personification, shape, or form. In other words, it is an abstract notion of the sacred reality or truth which transcends nature as embodied in created entities that can be grasped via the human reason and sensory capacities. However, al-Philbook distinguishes two types of nature. One of these he terms imprinting nature, Let's see if I can do this one. Al-Tagba, interesting. Imprinting nature, which lends as an entity its individual identity, thereby making it what it is. Oh, that's actually quite Hegelian. Hegelian? Hegelian? In that? Interesting. I need to revisit Diane. While the second, which he terms imprinted nature, al-Tagba al-Mutba, is the reality of the entity once its nature has been determined. Very interesting. Okay. I'm making some connections here with obviously different Western philosophers that we've revisited, and actually a text I recently wrote the paper on that actually discussed similar connections between Western philosophers regarding the construction of unity, disunity, of resolution, so on and so forth. Um, the imprinting, the self and the unself. So that's interesting. The imprinting nature is perceived via intuition, while the imprinted nature is perceived via the senses. The first is a dynamic entity that cannot be delimited or measured, while the second is static and can be delimited and measured. The relationship between these two concepts forms the background for al-Fawqi's analysis of religious and symbolic artwork in Judaism and Christianity, and in the pre-Islamic Greek and Roman cultures. He concludes on the basis of this analysis that these religions and cultures tended to so minimize the aesthetic value of art that it became nothing but the logical representation that virtually anyone would be capable of producing. Okay, that's a bit strongly worded. That's a bit biased right there. As, for example, in the Christian world, where abstraction in art is viewed not as something abstracted or stripped away from nature, but rather simply as an alternative way of depicting nature, where formalism is understood simply as a suggestion of the artist's experiential state. Okay, I'm not going to get into that. That's a bit of a very that's a very strong claim that you can't. I think that actually is taking Afroki's comments a bit out of context, because that's not exactly what he said. That's not exactly what he intended. Um, because particularly abstraction in the historic, particularly like in the pre-Islamic context, Christian art, abstraction wasn't so much a thing, so much as what we would consider abstraction. The way abstraction is a very loaded term. It is a very modern, contemporaneous term for a concept that didn't particularly exist in pre-explicitly representational traditionalist forms of art, and especially in the religious context. So, not super keen on that. Christian artwork in the form of iconography, for example, is an incarnational personal function. Okay, yeah, now we're back on track. Personal functional work that symbolically combines the natural and the sacred, particularly in religious rites, whereas Jewish artwork of a similar type is nearly absent due to Judaism's resistance to the notion of representing the divine reality in any. Okay, yeah, now we're back on track. That's right. Yeah, okay, cool. There is clearly an extreme contrast between the Jewish and Christian approaches to beauty, with the Jewish perspective rejecting any admixture of the sensory and the spiritual in the form of artwork. Fair. And with the Christian approach to artwork involving an exaggerated melding of the natural with the sacred truth. Shots fired. I wonder what St. Augustine would say about this, because he's kind of on point. A similar admixture of the natural and sacred reality is found in Greek artwork, whose starting point is Greek mythology expressed through the arts of poetry, drama. That's interesting. Okay, I didn't realize, and I think that is a fault of Dr. Hanash's argument regarding the contrasting nature between Islamic and pre-Islamic Christian specifically works here, is that he isn't quite defining what he considers and is discussing as art, because I've gone into this small text specifically with architecture in mind, because that's like a major function of Islamic art, calligraphy, so on and so forth. Uh, he didn't quite expand it out into the humanities, arts in that sense. In the Greeks' view, the love and experience of deity depend on the symbolic representation of metaphysical realities, as exemplified in what the Greeks termed deification, athalala. A human being manifested in the form of a deity as a means of presenting an ideal exemplar of that of human nature. This is consistent with the belief that the basic function of such symbolic art is to bring about the purification from sin and guilt. That feels a bit anachronistic. I mean, yeah, but sin is a bit the construction of original sin, which is really what informs a lot of Western conceptualizations of sin, is a very Christological concept that is very not informed. I mean, it's informed counter to the nation, so to speak, of deification and idolatry and what was perceived in that sense. But I don't think that's quite a tenable connection there. However, the question that arises here is, was Islamic art influenced by earlier approaches, or did it emerge and take form out of its own unique perspective? Well, I think the answer has to be obvious. There's no way any form of art, any particularly religious form of art, can be formed divorced from its, let's say, geographical contexts. I mean, there's a very specific reason why, if we go to, let's say, Jewish Talmudic illustrated manuscripts, that they do employ a style of illustration similar to Christian illumination, particularly in the methodologies in which um, and other folkloric figures in Jewish mythology are depicted. There's a reason for that, and that's because stylized pictures, stylized images are always going to be formed with the sociocultural impression in which the artist is functioning. The answer to this pivotal question, and Al-Filoki's view, can be found in what he terms stylization, which consists in representing natural entities in a non-naturalistic manner in order to draw a viewer's attention to the fact that what is natural is not equivalent to what is real. This, in Al-Filoki's view, is a sublime manner of artistic expression that strips the subject of its minute details and transmutes it to a form that bears no realistic resemblance to its appearance in nature. Hence, in contrast to the Western artistic ideal of stimulation or imitation, we find that the at hand of a high-minded artist shapes become nothing but artistic means of ornamentation rather than expressions of their own nature. Okay, I think I understand what the point he's getting at here. He wasn't. I think he probably should have clarified what he meant by approach. I thought he was referring to the technical, not the philosophical, the aesthetic, the epistemic value of how these approaches were mediated in artistic cultures, because that is absolutely true regarding the nature of shapes and shape construction in Islamic art versus the other Abrahamic arts. And honestly, I think we could even argue most world religions and socio-religious cultures, if we're being like really proper about this, religion just doesn't exist. That's a very Western notion. That what he's saying here is that if an Islamic artist is drawing, if he's constructing a minaret, for example, or a mosque, and he's employing particular geometric patterns, he's using those patterns in such a way where they actually, we have a similar concept to this in Judaism, where it's Hadar Mitzvah, where we use ornamentation as a way to elevate uh, the perception or relation to God, whereas that's much more codified in Islamic art, whereas in Judaism we have a bit of a different approach to it. So what he's saying here is that ornamentation is the purest, truest, most historically related way of elevating modes of worship versus an artistic claimant on truth, which is arguably what Christian art does very particular, which is type with its form of iconography, particularly the blessed icons and so on and so forth in Eastern Orthodox tradition, where the actual methods and modes of technique are meant to evoke and actually, in a way, transubstantiate actual methods and employments of divine connection, whereas we can't do that in this context, and specifically monotheistic context, obviously. Interesting. Muslim artists have produced a new art form consistent with their own monotheistic vision. Yeah, monotheism, called it. Yeah, son. Which is founded upon the premises that there is no deity but Allah, and that there is nothing in nature by means of which we could convey God's essence or depict the divine. So that's what I was talking about. That what we see, what we perceive, is so inherently, intrinsically informed by and inextricable to our own very limited mortal corporeal forms, that in turn any depictions we make of a divine realm or even a divine figure are therefore going to be limited. And in a sense, depending on what level of extreme you are in your religiosity, not even necessarily Islamic, this applies to Judaism as well, that the further extreme you are, the more bastardized inherently that depiction is going to be. There's a very good reason why you don't see a lot of post-life, post-mortality, like actually no post-mortality depictions of divinity or deity in Jewish art, because we have that same conception of what we have in nature is what we have, and that in turn, although there is certainly, and what we call it the neshama, the spark, the breath of life, that because of our own perceptions, our own mortality, our own perspective, we can't go further to equate that with the full expansiveness of unity of divinity. Based on this, here we go, and that there's nothing in nature by means of which we convey God's essence or depict the divine in a symbolic manner that relies on the simulation of nature. Based on this, Al-Philbook identifies the following features of Islamic art. One, stylization. Every image drawn from nature is presented in stylized form. In other words, so much distance is placed between the artist's subject and its natural characteristics that it is nearly unrecognizable. Yeah, ish. I mean, there is a very clear pattern, so to speak, of non-representative art construction into technique in Islamic art, but I think it would behoove him to expand on this more, because I understand his point. I need examples. I need other thinkers. Two, anti-symbolism. Muslim artists Muslim artists reject symbolism as their point of departure. Al-Philbook viewed this rejection of symbolism as an Islamic art's supreme badge of distinction. Muslims take pride in the fact that their art is devoid of any pagan or idolatrous spirit, and that, as a consequence, it avoids all danger of confusing the creator with the creation. Interesting. I can see that. Given the foregoing, Islamic art has incorporated some art forms, but not others, based on the worldview that serves its guiding principles. It excludes, for example, sculpture, drama, and to some extent drawing and painting. And this is what confused me earlier um, when he was discussing the Greek forms of art, because Islamic societies have very different constructions of one, what is art, to art in its social function, what can actually be performed, because of one, religious conscriptions, to social scripts, so on and so forth, like what is actually appropriate. And not only what is appropriate, but what can be elevated in a theological sense, in a doctrinal sense, while including A, auditory arts involving language and literature, such as, for example, poetry and Quranic recitation, and B, visual arts such as geometrical designs and patterns, calligraphy, ornamentation, etc. On the foundations of Islamic art, and this is, I think, going to be my last passage. Al-Philbook based his theory of Islamic art on two foundations, one spiritual and the other historical. The spiritual foundation consists in the Islamic principle of monotheism. The affirmation that there is no deity but Allah points to the existence of only two realms of reality. The first, sorry, I just got the message, or creature to which no human or creaturely attributes can be properly ascribed, and the second is that of creation, including the world of nature as a whole and that the human beings in particular. This monotheistic foundation has guided Islamic visual art, which, in a notable contrast to artistic naturalism, stylizes its subjects in a manner less described above, on the notion that there's nothing in the created realm, particularly in human beings, that might be viewed as a symbol, instrument, suggestion, expression, embodiment, emanation, or any derivation of sacred essence. For this reason, Islam excludes any form of personal representation in art. As for Islamic art's historical foundation, it is seen in what al-Philbook terms the Arab mindset that colors the historical environment in which the divine revelation emerged and took form. Similarly, it was the Arab mindset as embodied in the person of the Prophet Muhammad that served as the conduit for the divine revelation that was to be delivered to all people in all times and all places. Al-Philbook viewed the Arabic language with its clear, logical, geometrically precise structure as the source of Arabic poetry's musicality. True. Oh my gosh. It was these characteristics of the Arabic language which, in al-Philbook's view, caused Arabs to perceive Islamic art as a dimension of infinitude, not found in other forms to which reference has been made. I completely, yes. Um, so for those of you who are learning Arabic or speak Arabic, especially as a native English speaker coming to Arabic later in life, there's a very logical, very precise, and very lexically pure language, in the sense that there is a very particular nuance to not just pronouns, to suffixes in terms of possession and that kind of thing, but also that words have a very particular type of lingual texture, that lends itself beautifully to poetry and music, not even necessarily music, just speaking in general. It's wonderful, and that's one of the reasons I started learning it, because it's a joy to speak when you can do it well, that is, which I'm not quite there yet. The principal features of Islamic art to which al-Philbook devoted attention were abstractionism, monotheism, and kineticism. I know that word. Why am I mispronouncing that? The abstractionism that marks Islamic art can be perceived in the endlessly repeated geometric patterns that mark much of Islamic ornamentation, whilst monotheism, whilst Whilst monotheism is visible in the way in which a given work of art will consist of numerous units that function harmoniously to form a larger unified design or structure. And as for kineticism, it manifests itself in the design of a piece of art in such a way that the work's spatial and temporal dimensions are gathered into a pattern of shapes and sounds that lend the viewer or listener a sense of dynamic progression. And I think I'm going to stop there. I know that you all may miss Hegel. I didn't miss Hegel this week, but I'll get back to him next week. For those that did tune in, I hope you enjoyed. I know it's a bit of an unorthodox choice, but because it does touch on aesthetic philosophy and Islamic philosophy and has some beautiful passages from the Quran, I thought you guys may be interested. And I hope you enjoyed. And we will be revisiting this big boy soon. And let me get my screen set up. All right. Take care. Sayonara from your Philbook Doomer GF. And stay safe in this terrible time.